Hey there, it's Kat and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I want to talk about some book recommendations because I haven't done one of these in a while. I generally just talk about books, but in this video I'm specifically recommending that you read them. And I'm going to do this with a slight twist because the Hemisphere Christmas Games is coming up and I'm going to use the prompts for the Hemisphere Christmas Games as a sort of jumping off point for these recommendations. So they are just general recommendations that I would like to give, but also if you're taking part in the Hemisphere Christmas Games, then you could maybe use them as inspiration for the prompts. So the first sort of kick-off point that I'm going to use for these recommendations is a book where the action takes place mainly on a body of water or around a body of water. It can be any body of water. So let's get into the recs. The first book that I want to recommend is Hold Back the Tide by Melinda Salisbury. I read this earlier this year and it is a book that is set around a loch in Scotland. It's kind of like a historical horror. So the plot of this book is that the main character lives on the loch with her dad, who is supposed to sort of keep an eye on the water levels in the loch. The loch starts to drain a little bit and some creepy things start happening, and I really don't want to tell you anything more about it because I went into it not really knowing what was going to happen and it was so good and really creepy. I had a nightmare after reading this book and I don't really have nightmares and I don't know what it was, but it got to me in the best way and I really enjoyed this book and I kind of want to read it again, so I really want to recommend that one. The next book that I want to recommend is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, who is also known as Shauna Maguire. This is a horror book. I promise all of these aren't horror books, but I just have had fun with horror this year, so it seems to be on my mind. Anyway, Into the Drowning Deep is murderous mermaids and scientists trying to investigate them. Other things that I really liked about this book is that it has some disability rep. It has representation of a deaf character who uses American Sign Language. It has an autistic character. There are some queer characters. It's great. And also, I don't know what it is about scientists meeting horror creatures. It just does something for me and I'm like, yes. Go to your doom, please, scientists. Go to your doom. I would like to recommend this. If you've already read this one, there is a prequel novella called Rolling in the Deep. So yeah, this one's set on the ocean and it was a good time. The next book I want to recommend is To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. It's been a while since I've read this one, so my synopsis may be totally off at this point, but I remember really enjoying it and sort of flying through it. It's a sort of YA Little Mermaid retelling where the mermaid is trying to kill the prince instead of kiss the prince, I guess. I don't know, I quite liked it. It was a really easy read for me, and if you're in the mood for an easy mermaid type story, then that would be a good one to pick up. Obviously, very much set on the ocean. The next book that I want to talk about is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Yes, I know this one is a little bit of a stretch, but I feel like this book has a large section which is set on an island and around the sea, or on a coastal town even, so I feel like it counts for this. I feel like it counts. Also, it's a great book and you should definitely read it. It's very interesting and there is a section that is written in second person, and if you start off this book and you're starting to feel a little bit like, oh, this I'm not sure about this writing style, stick with it, because this book didn't really hit for me until some things had sort of come together, and when they did, it was worth it and I really enjoyed this book. The first time I read it, I gave it 3 stars. What was I thinking? Because the second time that I read it, I gave it 5 stars and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, it's kind of set by the water, kind of. So the next sort of Hemisphere Christmas Games prompt that I'm going to use to kick off some recommendations is to read a book with something dark on the cover. So, I mean, there's so many books that have something dark on the cover, so I've just basically recommended you stuff, but you could also tailor it to these prompts, and it's fine. It's fine. So for that one, the first book that I'm going to recommend is The Gutter Prayer by Gareth Hanrahan. This is a sort of grimdark fantasy. Look at this beautiful cover. Just want to say, I have to point that out every single time I look at this cover. It is beautiful. So as I said, this book is a grimdark fantasy and it is about thieves. There are ghouls, there are weird sentient magical worm creatures and stone men and people made out of wax that are like police. It has a very interesting set of characters, but it's also predominantly about religion and the different religions in this fantasy world and how the gods sort of interact with them. Very interesting, definitely recommend reading it. The next book that I want to recommend for something dark on the cover is The Book of M by Peng Shepherd. This is kind of a sci-fi magical realism-ish type book where everyone in the world starts to lose their shadows, and when people lose their shadows, they also start to lose their memories and forget how to do things. But alongside that, things that they misremember start becoming real. So if they think that statues can move, then statues around them will start moving. Or if they think that deer are purple, then there will be purple deer wandering around. It's also just kind of sad in general, because like anybody losing their memories is a sad thing, but it's an interesting type of apocalypse book that happens in a very different way, and I would definitely recommend it. The next book I want to recommend is Skin Deep by Liz Nugent. This is a thriller that I read recently. It's a book that I just like to describe as having awful people in it. The main character in this book is possibly one of the worst characters that I've ever read about. She does some horrible things. She's a horrible person. And I feel like this book is done in such a right way that while you're reading it, you're like, oh god, this, wow. And then the end happens, and it has just the best ending for this book. And I'm not going to spoil it, I'm not going to say anything else about it, but if you want to read about horrible people and have an extremely satisfying ending, then check this book out. So I feel like books with dark on the cover are really easy to just find recommendations for anyway. So I'm going to move on to the next prompt for the Hemisphere Christmas Games, just as a kickoff to talk about these recommendations. So next we're going to talk about comforting reads, and the first thing that I want to talk about is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This is a book I picked up recently, read it as a buddy read with Kayla from Crack Into a Good Book, and we sped through this book. It was so good. I don't know if it's just the mood that I was in, but I was really here for sort of a fake dating relationship with a grumpy sunshine character dynamic, and I just loved it. It was really cool. It is definitely based on Rey and Kylo Ren from Star Wars, and there are some nerdy references in here, and you could definitely tell that those characters are the ones that were pictured when these characters were created. But also, I just love it. It was so good, and I really enjoyed it, and I feel like it really cemented Ali Hazelwood as an author that I really want to check out, so definitely want to recommend it to you guys, because I already want to read this again, and I read it less than a month ago. The next book that I consider a comfort read is Eliza and Her Monsters. Now hear me out, because I know this book is actually just very much about anxiety, but just the characters and the way that they overcome the anxiety and the focus around fandoms really just feels like nostalgic for me. I'm sure many of you can relate to the nostalgia of being involved in fandoms, especially when you were younger and probably having anxiety. I don't know, if you're watching me, you probably have experienced some sort of anxiety, even if just watching me and watching me hold my coffee cup, because I know that that causes many of you anxiety. I apologize for that, but I can't help waving my arms around even when holding a drink. I'm sorry. So yeah, this one is a comfort read for me, and I could read it over and over again. The next book that I want to recommend here is The Carnian Fox by Kay MacLeod. And this book is kind of like what would happen if Pokemon were in our world and were real and more vicious and dangerous, because that's what wild animals are like. But the animals in this are called Maiamon, and they are synthetic creatures that now exist in the wild because people got bored of them and sort of threw them out. And the reason that this book is a comforting read for me is that it is nostalgic. Again, I don't know why, I just focus on nostalgia when I'm talking about comfort, so this one really works for me because I am nostalgic about Pokemon, and this felt like a different take on Pokemon. And I really liked the Maiamon, and also I liked being traumatized by the events that happen in this book. It was good though, it was comforting, apart from the sad times that happen at certain points. The last book that I want to recommend is more of a series, and that is the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, because I find that these books are just really easy to pick up, especially when I'm in a reading slump or something. I don't feel the need to read every single one of these books back to back. I feel like I can just come back to it when I feel like returning to a world that I know that I'm going to enjoy the story in. So the Dresden Files, if you don't know, is about a wizard for hire called Harry Dresden, and he gets into all of the shenanigans, and there are different types of creatures that he interacts with. And it's just really fun a lot of the time. Also, if you get the audiobooks, James Masters, who played Spike in Buffy, narrated them, and he does a great job. So let's move on to the next prompt, and that is something light on the cover. So essentially any book that has something light on the cover, and I have a lot of recommendations for this. So the first book that I want to recommend should probably come as no surprise to anyone, but I haven't talked about it in a while, which I'm mad about myself for not doing, and it's The Last Sun by Katie Edwards. This is an urban fantasy new adult set in a world where there is magic in our world. Our world has had New Atlantis plonked in the middle of it, and the people who live in New Atlantis have different types of magic, and the magic and the hierarchy system is based around the tarot card decks. The Last Sun is of the Sun Throne, and look, there is literal light in his eyes and light shining through this window, and I just feel like it counts. I love to recommend this book as just a book in general, but one of the key things that I love to talk about this book is the two main characters and their relationship. They have the best banter. It's so good. They're like brothers, but they're not brothers because one of them's technically the other one's bodyguard. And also there's like a queer romance in here, and it's just great, and you should just read this book. Please, I just keep recommending it. Just please read this book. Please. I know the third one is coming out soon, and I am so excited to read it. So excited. The next book I want to recommend is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. I'm going with this lightness here, and also that's kind of light, and the writing's kind of light. We just go with it. I just wanted to talk about this book. So this book is about a girl who gets a chance to participate in a competition to be the Emperor's tailor, and she can't do it unless she dresses up as her brother. So it's a competition book with like a little bit of deception in the background. But then in the second half of the book, it turns into this sort of magical quest book. And I never hear anyone talk about that part of the book, but that was my favourite part of the book because it put the main character with a love interest who annoys the shit out of her. And I love it because I just really enjoyed that character anyway, but their dynamic together was like, I'm here for it. The next book I want to talk about is The Fever King by Victoria Lee. As you can see on the cover, there is a lot of electricity going here, there, and everywhere, and that is the light on this cover. I really enjoyed this book, got through it really quickly. It kind of reminded me of The Foxhole Court, but like sci-fi with magical powers. So angsty boys with powers, maybe trying to overthrow the government, or, you know. And it kind of gave me those sci-fi YA dystopian books of yesteryear nostalgia that I really like. I'm not sure that sentence made any sense, but I don't have any more, so that's what we're getting. Next up I want to recommend On the Edge of Gone by Corinna Dalvis. I recommend this book quite a lot, and that is because I loved it. So this book follows an autistic main character during the end of the world. A comet is coming down, and they know it's going to hit Earth, so most of the human race are either going on a ship or hunkering down in a bunker. And her family is late. And because of that, she ends up with the chance to potentially get on board one of the last ships leaving Earth. And I don't want to say anything more about it because I think it's quite good to go in not sort of expecting that, but it is definitely an apocalypse book. I mean, it's bad times. Most of the general population of Earth is probably going to die. But I like to recommend this book because, one, I enjoyed the story, and two, it represents autistic women really well, at least from my perspective as an autistic woman. I really resonated with a lot of the things that were being said by the main character and felt by the main character, and I just really recommend it. Another book that I'd like to recommend is Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee. This is a sci-fi YA superhero type book and follows a character who has two superhero parents and I think superhero siblings, but she hasn't got any powers. And it's about her trying to sort of deal with that and also having a crush on this girl that she likes from school, and there are more complicated things that are happening, but I like this book and I feel like it gave me the feels that I wanted, and it's a very bright cover. Yeah, I enjoyed the first two books in the series, and I haven't read the third one yet, but I really need to because it was just a really good series. So let's move on to the final Hemisphere Christmas Games prompt that I want to recommend some books for, and that is to read a book where most of the action takes place where it snows. So admittedly, my recommendations for this aren't like pleasant, happy, snowy books because that's just not really my aesthetic. I tend to read books where murder and death happen. Go figure. So the first book that I want to recommend is The Terror by Dan Simmons. This is quite a large book, but it is definitely worth it. It's sort of a historical fiction with like a fantasy-ish twist to it. So the story is based on two ships that were trying to find the North Arctic Atlantic Passage, essentially across Canada. They were convinced that there was a way through there and they disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. Their ships have since been found. Some dodgy things happened on that voyage because they definitely got stuck in the ice more than once. And also there's like a weird beast that is after them, and cannibalism and scurvy. I don't know why, but every time I talk about this book, scurvy is the most horrifying thing to me because like bleeding scalp and I'm like, no, it's creepy. But I really enjoyed this book and it really made me feel snowy and cold, and I was like, this is perfect to read in the winter months. The next book that I want to recommend is a graphic novel called Spread, and it's kind of like what would happen if The Thing from the 1980s film The Thing made it onto land and turned into plants that are gooey and red and gross. I feel like that's all you need. If you like The Thing, you will like this graphic novel. The next book I want to recommend is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This is a thriller about a woman who is trying to get home to her dying mother, and she's driving home in the snow and ends up getting snowed into this rest stop with a few other people. When walking around trying to get cell service, she finds a little girl in the back of a truck who has obviously been kidnapped and being held hostage there. So the main story is about her trying to find a way to get the girl out make sure the girl doesn't die of cold, and also try and get away from whoever it was that put the little girl there. It was really gripping, really fast paced. I sped through it and I would definitely recommend it. The next book I want to recommend is Beneath the Dark Ice by Greg Beck, and this book is what I like to call Jurassic Park in Antarctica. Again, don't feel like I need to give very much explanation about this. There are some creatures, prehistoric creatures, and it's like an action book, and I love it. So the next book I want to recommend is The Secret Santa by Trish Harnato, and I just want to recommend this one because it is a thriller that is set at a Christmas party, and it's snowy, obviously. Snowy. If you're in the mood for a thriller that is pretty easy to read, then I would definitely recommend that one. The last book that I'm going to recommend is White by Tim Levin. This is a very short horror novella, and it's kind of like a snow apocalypse where there are creatures that are trying to get the people who are stuck in this hotel, and it's just a really short book. So if you want horror and you want it to not be too long, then that is a good one to read. So those are the recommendations that I want to give you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you are taking part in the Hemisphere Christmas Games, then hopefully this has helped you pick your TBR if you're still trying to decide what to read. If you like this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!